Recording in progress.
All right, you can knock on the door there. Let them know. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call to order this meeting of the 2nd of December, 2021, City of Nashua Planning Board. And can we get a roll call, please?
Yes. Mayor Donchis, Mike Peterson,
Here.
Scott Leclaire,
Here.
Adam Varley,
Here.
Maggie Harper here, Alderman David Tenza, Alderwoman Jan Schmidt, Dan Hudson,
Here.
Bob Bollinger,
Here.
Larry Hirsch,
Here.
and Mark Meehan.
Here.
Okay, so we have a quorum. We'll go ahead and move on with our agenda. First up, we have a few sets of minutes in the packet. I'm going to start with actually November 4th. The first packet is our November 4th, 2021 special meeting where we discuss the parking study. Has anybody had a chance to take a look at those minutes and want to make a motion as to whether they're ready for us to accept as written or need amendments?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Bollinger.
Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion that the November 4th, 2021 minutes regarding the parking study be accepted as written.
Okay, so we have that motion to accept as written by Mr. Bollinger. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Varley. Any further discussion by the board? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? So it looks like 3 abstentions, and the rest,
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 4, 5 on the positive. So that motion passes. Next up, we have a second set of minutes from the November 4th, the regular planning board meeting. Anybody had a chance to take a look at those? Want to make a motion?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Bollinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion that we accept the minutes of the November 4th, 2021 regularly scheduled planning board meeting as written.
Okay, so we have that motion to accept these minutes as indicated by Mr. Bollinger. Do we have a second? Second by anybody?
Did we
Yeah.
already approve the November 4th minutes?
No, I don't think so.
In the November 18th minutes, it says we
Oh, did we?
approved them.
All right,
Oh.
well, we reapproved them, I guess. So they were doubly good.
Super.
Well, let's just finish it up.
We'll just, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
We'll
so I'll
it.
second.
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Abstentions? Same 3? Okay. You're probably right. Sure. We'll make sure. So next up, we have the November 18th minutes. Anybody had a chance to look at those and want to make a motion? Mr. Bollinger, did you get to those?
Mr. Chair, I would have, except I don't think I have those. My apologies.
Anybody else have a chance to look at those?
I don't have them.
I didn't get them either.
Okay, I did receive them in my email, so, and I have looked at them. I'll make a motion to approve those as written. Does anybody
I'll second.
second it? Second by Mr. Varley. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Abstentions? 3. Yep, same 3. All right, so that motion passes. Next up, communications.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the National Planning Board. The following correspondences were received after your packet was sent. Case A21-0262-0254, 8 Blackstone Drive. Email from Wayne Husband, City Traffic Engineer, dated 12/1/2021, Amherst Street Corridor Contribution. 2, letter from Joe Mandola, Street Construction Engineer, dated 12/1/2021, engineering comments. Next case, 821-0256, which is 303 Main Street. We have an email dated November 28th, 2021, from David Mess-Felder, 14 Stevens Street. Number 2, email dated 12/1/2021 from Wayne Husband, city traffic engineer concerning Main Street corridor contribution. Letter from Joe Mandola dated 12/1/2021, engineering comments. And we also have an email dated 12/2/2021 from Carol Baldwin, Executive Director, Nashua Adult Learning Center. We have a waiver letter for 190-279EE dated 12/2/2021, existing conditions on adjacent properties. 6 waiver letters showing 190-279I and J, showing utilities around the site dated 12/2/2021. And the final one, waiver letter allowing overhead utilities to continue 190-221A and C. And actually, there's one last one, waiver request form, 10/7/21. And that would be it.
Okay, thanks a lot. Report of committee liaison, anybody have anything? Nothing, okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and read the procedure of the meeting and hearings. So as we move forward, after each legal notice of a conditional special use permit, site plan, or subdivision is read by myself, the board will determine if the application is complete, ready for us to take jurisdiction. Public hearing, if we do take jurisdiction, the public hearing will begin, at which time we'll ask the applicant or their representative to give a presentation or an overview and description of their project. They'll speak to whether or not they agree with the recommended staff stipulations, and the board will have an opportunity to ask relevant follow-up questions of the applicant or our staff. The chair will then ask for testimony, or myself, I will ask for testimony from the audience. First, I'll ask for anyone wishing to speak in opposition or concern to a plan. I'll ask that you come forward to the microphone and state your name and address for the record. If you're listening in on Zoom, then we'll have you unmute, and same thing, state your name and address for the record. This will be your time to express concerns or ask questions you have regarding the plan. Next, I'll ask for testimony from anybody wishing to speak in favor of the plan. At that point, the board may then ask relevant follow-up questions of the applicant, and the applicant will be given a rebuttal period, at which time they'll speak to any of the concerns raised by the public testimony. After this is completed, the public hearing will end, and the board will resume a public meeting, at which time we'll deliberate and vote on the application before us. I'd ask that both sides keep their remarks to the subject at hand and not repeat what has already been said. I want to be fair to everyone and make the best possible decision based on the testimony presented and presented in considering all of our applicable approval criteria established in the Nashua revised ordinances for these conditional special use permits, site plans, and subdivision plans. I thank everybody for their attention, and if you do have a cell phone, if you could put on vibrate or something, and if you are listening on Zoom, please remain muted until you're given the opportunity, so in a public comment period. So, okay, with that being said, moving through the agenda, old business conditional special use permits, there are none. Old business subdivision plans, is case A21-0177. That's Jigna and Sachin Patel owners. This is an application that we had tabled from our October 7th, 2021 meeting. At this point, we're being asked to move this to March 10th.
Correct.
Right, so yeah, there's nobody here to present, so I would entertain a motion to continue to table that to our March 10th, 2022 meeting. Okay, so we have that motion to table by Mr. Meehan to the March 10th, 2022 meeting. Do we have a second? Second by Mr. Hirsch. Any further discussion by the board?
I'm curious how it's going.
Pretty well. They've met with their engineer, and they're coming up with some solutions, and we could have some time for the spring, and we should have something coming up.
Okay, great. Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? None? That motion passes. Okay. Next up on the agenda, old business site plans, there are none. New business conditional special use permits, there are none. New business subdivision plans, this is case number 821-0262, 75 Deerwood Drive LLC owner, Sequel Development and Management Incorporated applicant. This is an application and acceptance of proposed subdivision plan to show condominium and condominium documents. Property is located at 8 Blackstone Drive. And I'm going to hear this agenda item in conjunction with the new business site plan. This is case number 821-0254, the same owner and same applicant and same location. So first up from the board, does anybody have a chance to take a look at the subdivision plan application? Want to make a motion as to whether that's ready for us to take jurisdiction?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Bollinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to accept jurisdiction over new business subdivision plan, case A21-0262.
Okay, so we have that motion to take jurisdiction of A21-0262 new subdivision plan. Do we have a second on that? Second by Mr. Hirsch. Any further discussion by the board? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? So we have jurisdiction of that. Then with respect to the subdivision plan, Mr. Bollinger?
Actually, Mr. Chair, just for clarification, the site plan.
Excuse me, site plan, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to accept jurisdiction over new business site plan, case A21-0254.
Okay, so we have a motion to take jurisdiction of A21-0254, the new business site plan. Do we have a second? Second by Mr. Peterson. Any further discussion by the board? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? That motion passes. Okay, so we have jurisdiction of both the subdivision and the site plan. We have somebody from the applicant who wants to present, and you can go ahead, obviously, and go right through both applications and take questions afterwards. I don't know that it matters. We've got it overhead too, right? So, yeah, can everybody see it overhead okay? Yeah, the handouts might be okay, but we can see the overhead too, so.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, folks. My name is Peter Dolph. I'm the president of Sequel Development Management, Inc. We're located at 2 Knightsbridge Drive, Nashua, New Hampshire, 03063. Tonight, I'm accompanied by Chris Rice from TF Moran. They're our engineers on this project. I just wanted to note a couple of things before I turn the mic over to Chris. A little history. Sequel Development and Property Management, Inc. has managed Knightsbridge Arms Condominium Association since 1994. My business partner sits on the board of directors of that association, and as well, he and I own a number of units in that project. The reason I mention that, in order to do this project, we had to work with the board of directors to get a right-of-way across part of the Knightsbridge property, which required a vote of 75% of the unit owners of Knightsbridge Arms. It's a 288-unit association. Getting 288 condominium owners to respond to anything is a huge bar. Getting 288 of them to respond favorably of something is yet another level of difficulty. But we did achieve that. We only had, I believe, 6 or 7 people actually vote against the land giving us the right of way. So I wanted to mention that. The other thing I want to mention is I know this board is very diligent about going out and visiting sites ahead of time. Knightsbridge Arms is in the midst of the second year of a multi-year project to pull some of the trees back on the property. Last year, at the end of 5 Rodian Drive, we did about $15,000 in tree work and took a lot of trees back. This year, we were scheduled to take trees from behind 2 and 4 Rodian Drive, which worked out very well because it borders the project that we're talking about today. So if you were out there in the last few days, you've seen some tree work going on. We were not being presumptuous that we were going to just get past this board. That tree work was scheduled for the condominium association. Some of that tree work is admittedly going on our property as well. It just made sense to do both projects at once. But I just wanted to be very clear with everybody that the tree work had been scheduled with the Condo Association for a long time. And then, we dovetailed this site work in at the same time. So that's why you do see some of the trees coming down. And then other than that, and I want to thank the professional staff and the board for working with us in this project. As always, the national staff is terrific to work with. And I'll hand it over to Chris.
Okay, thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. My name is Chris Rice with TF Moran, here on behalf of the applicant, Sequel Development and Management, Inc. With me this evening is Peter Doloff, the president of Sequel Development and Management. And we're here this evening for a proposed subdivision and site plan application for 8 Blackstone Drive, which is owned by 75 Deerwood Drive LLC. The site plan portion of the project is relative to the 18 proposed townhouses with associated site improvements, and the subdivision portion of the application is relative to the proposed condominium and the condominium documents. Little history on the property. I don't know if you want to just, Matt, go back to one of the aerial slides for us, and I don't know if that'll work on the screen. It does not. The applicant previously appeared before the City Zoning Board of Adjustment and obtained 2 variances for this project. One was to allow an 18-unit multifamily development consisting of 3 buildings with 6 units each, and the second variance that was obtained was to exceed the maximum allowable density from 17 units to 18 units. And I think that was completed roughly a year ago. You're looking at the aerial of the property here. Matt, if you can just slide your hand down a little bit into our site. So the existing property that you're looking at is 8 Blackstone Drive, tax map H, lot 653. It's approximately 1.4 acres in size, and it's currently vacant and has been used as a paved parking area. We are bordered to the south by the recently completed Seasons Corner Market gas station. To the southeast is 547 Amherst Street, which is an office building. To the east and northeast of us is Millstone 1, Millstone 2, and Laurel Oaks, which is a residential development consisting of approximately 300 units. To the north and northwest is Knightsbridge Condominiums, which is another residential development consisting of approximately 288 units. And to the west of us is Gate City Collision Center, which is a commercial use. If you're looking at this tax map sketch, our lot actually used to be part of the gas station lot. It was subdivided. The gas station built their project and sold their lot to my client. And also as part of that subdivision, you see that little sliver on the left-hand side of our lot, that was transferred over to Gate City Collision as part of that subdivision application. So our lot is that box kind of in the middle, and it does include the access drive that does service the gas station. Our lot is located in the general business district, and we're bordered by the RC district, urban residents, to the north, northeast, and northwest. To the southeast, the 547 Amherst Street building is in the GI mixed-use district, and the Gate City Collision building is in the GB zoning district, same as ours. So as you can see, our lot is kind of in a transition area from business use to residential use. If you wouldn't mind going to the site plan, Matt, I'd appreciate it. So the proposed site plan and condominium plan show 18 residential townhouse condominium units with associated access, parking, and site improvements. There's 3 proposed buildings on site, each 3 stories in height. Each building has 6 condominium units for a total of 18 units. Each townhouse unit has a 760 square foot footprint with an 8-foot by 18-foot deck off the back, which is accessed off of the second level. And there's 3 bedrooms in each unit, and on the first level of each unit is a 1-car garage underneath. Access to the property is to be provided by an access easement. A new curb cut at the end of Blackstone Drive is shown on the plan. As Peter mentioned, they've already obtained an easement from Knightsbridge Condominium for this work. We did want to note that there is an existing bus stop sign right where our proposed curb cut is shown. We've called for it at this time to be shifted slightly to the north between our curb cut and one of the Knightsbridge Arms curb cuts. There's a distance of about 70 feet between those 2 points. Most school buses are 35 to 45 feet max. We're committed to working with the school district if there's a better location to shift the bus stop to, but we feel that there's adequate space to relocate that along the cul-de-sac. There is a secondary access road shown connecting to the gas station lot. This was really what drove the access to the cul-de-sac, is that the owner didn't really want the access to the development coming through a commercial business entrance. We have left it as a secondary emergency access drive. It's 20 feet wide. There are do not enter signs at both ends with a little speed hump in the middle. We've coordinated that with fire department for access, the name of the road, where the fire hydrant's going to be located, and the barriers, the signage that would be provided, as well as with our abutter, the Seasons Corner Market gas station. Relative to utilities, the property is to be serviced by municipal sewer, Pennachuck Water, Liberty Gas, and Eversource Electric. As part of the application package, we submitted will serve letters from all 3 utility providers. During the construction of the abutting gas station, we knew that this project was starting the design phase, so we coordinated with planning staff, the gas station, and the utility companies to leave service stubs for gas and electric when they completed their work. So those are already on site. Water and sewer are going to go up the access drive towards the cul-de-sac at Blackstone Drive and tie into mains that are in Blackstone Drive. Relative to the sewer, all the sewer in this area goes to a city-owned pump station, which is just to the right, where you kind of see the little piece of pavement come off of Blackstone Drive. That's the access to the pump station. So we were asked to coordinate with Woodard & Curran, who had done the analysis for the city for the pump station upgrades in that area. My client hired them to do the analysis. We provided a copy of that memo to planning staff, and it basically states that the pump station can handle the sewer flows from our development, which are pretty minor, once the upgrades are completed. We were recently informed that the schedule for the upgrades may not be completed until June of 2023, possibly September of 2023. We're not sure how this is all going to work out. When I was coordinating with Bill Keating from the city a while ago, they were just in the process of awarding the contract, and he said I should check back in with him mid-December to see if a formal schedule has been put together. So I'll follow up on that, but at this time, the applicant would like to proceed with the approval process. You never know if construction schedules may change, or there might be an opportunity for us to tie one of the buildings into the existing pump station infrastructure, but we'd have to investigate that a little further and work with staff to make sure that the flows can be handled. So if it's the pleasure of the board, we'd like to proceed, just knowing that if that schedule holds to the 2023 dates, that we may have to come back before you late next year for an extension should we be approved, just due to that item. Regarding stormwater, existing stormwater from the site really runs in 2 directions. Approximately half the site sheet flows towards Blackstone Drive, and the other half sheets towards a low point between us and Gate City Collision, which then is piped down to Amherst Street. The site has very good soils and a high infiltration rate. We've proposed a closed drainage system consisting of catch basins and piping, which directs all the stormwater from the site to an underground chamber system that infiltrates, treats, and retains the stormwater, infiltrates it back into the groundwater, and we've shown a peak rate, a reduction in the peak rate of runoff and volume for all storm events. Some are in the order of magnitude of 30 to 50% as you get into the higher storms. The lower storms are seeing a reduction of about 10 to 20%, but we have reduced runoff to all locations for all storm events. We've also included a lighting plan in the application. We proposed 2 lighting poles just along the access drive, just to provide some lighting as people drive up the entrance. We also provided a landscaping plan, which consists of 45 trees and 120 shrubs throughout the property. We also included a traffic memorandum. This shows that the development's anticipated to generate a maximum of 13 p.m. peak hour trips. The a.m. peak is slightly less. That equates to 1 new trip every about 4.6 minutes. The conclusion of the traffic report was basically that this is in the order of magnitude of day-to-day variation and is less than 1% of the total traffic on Route 101A. So, excuse me, the existing roadway network is more than sufficient to handle the traffic from this development. We have received city engineering comments, which we've reviewed, and all appear relatively minor and mostly cleanup items, with the exception of the sewer comment, which I mentioned. We'll have to see how that pans out. But we are committed to working with city planning staff and engineering to address all comments to their satisfaction. We also received traffic comments. The only comment was a request for a contribution of $200 per peak hour trip, which would equate to $2,600, which the applicant has agreed to. Condominium documents were supplied as part of the application. It's our understanding that they've been reviewed and approved by the city attorney. We do have a waiver request, one waiver request that is part of this application, and it's really in 2 pieces. They're both relative to section 190-181B2, table 181-2, which is relative to the required buffer width and required plantings. So this section requires a buffer to be provided for any lot that is in any industrial or commercial district that abuts a residential district. Our proposed development is located in the GB zoning district. We abut a residential district. However, we're proposing a residential use, which is a variance that was granted by the zoning board. We feel this is a reasonable request, given that it's a unique situation. More importantly, the intent of the buffer, as stated in the regulations, says that it's to mitigate the impacts from non-residential development in non-residential districts on adjacent residential districts. I don't think this regulation really contemplated our situation, which was where a residential use in a non-residential district abutting a residential district. If our site was in the same zone as the abutting site, zero buffer would be required, and we do exceed all the required setbacks that are required per the regulations. We are proposing a buffer of approximately 9 feet along the east and north sides, and that distance that I'm giving you is from the property line to the proposed fence, which is roughly where you see that we have our proposed plantings. At the closest point of the closest building to the closest condominium building, our deck is about 18 feet from the property line, and our deck is about 58 feet from the corner of the closest building. And then as you head to the right on the plan or to the southeast, that distance expands up to about 130 feet. And as you can see from this plan, and probably one of the aerials that I provided, is a dense vegetated strip in there with evergreens, so it is pretty well vegetated. And there are natural buffers as well along the east side. Blackstone Drive is the only thing on the right-hand side of us, and the only thing between us and Blackstone Drive is the city pump station. So we have proposed a 6-foot-tall stockade fence along both the north and east sides, and we've proposed additional trees than what's required in those areas. The second part of the waiver, which I apologize didn't make it into the language of the cover letter waiver request, but it is listed on the landscape plan, and it's relative to the same buffer requirement, but the number of shrubs that are required. Along the north property line, 50 shrubs are required, and we have 54 are required, and we've proposed 30. And along the lower right-hand side, 41 shrubs are required, and we proposed 0. We did that because we felt that the stockade fence provides a much better screening than shrubs would in that area, and then the same thing along the north side. If it pleases the board, should the board wish to grant the conditional approval, the owner would like the flexibility to work with city staff and the Knightsbridge condominium to possibly add additional plantings in lieu of a fence if they thought that that was a better situation from their perspective. And that kind of ties into the tree clearing that Peter was talking about, that they had to take down some trees close to that building on their property due to some overhangs and I think runoff drainage issues from the leaves and such. So it might be a better situation that once that clearing is done to kind of see what's out there, and we're happy to work with staff. Maybe a suggested condition could be that this would be the absolute minimum to be provided, which would be the 6-foot fence with all the plantings and trees shown, unless we're able to submit a revised landscape plan that shows additional landscaping to the satisfaction of city staff, if that was acceptable to the board. And if you wouldn't mind flipping the elevation map. It's our opinion that this use is really more consistent with the surrounding neighborhood and less intrusive compared to possibly go there, given that we're in the GV zoning district. I only know that because I was part of the project team a few years ago that received approval for the 5-story climate-controlled self-storage facility on this lot. That did not move forward at the time, but that was an approved project, and I think that that would be a lot more intrusive to the neighborhood. I believe that we had also requested and received a waiver for the buffer setback in that case as well. In any case, I also just wanted to show an elevation of the building. All 3 buildings are the same style and look. And I would like to thank city engineering and planning staff for all their help throughout the process, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thanks. Open up to the board. Questions for the applicant? Mr. Varley?
I just had a quick question. On the subdivision plan, is the only purpose of that to show the access easement?
And the limited common areas that are part of the condominium
Okay.
documents. That's the only reason for that plan.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bollander?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Rice, just a couple of questions. One is about the emergency access or secondary access. It looks like you're not permitted to enter the condominium area from the Shell station, based on the do not enter signs, but it appears as though residents of the condominium association may be able to exit. I don't see any counterbalancing do not enter signs on the condo side.
They
Could
might
you
not
just
show-
explain that a little bit?
Sure. They might be hidden by some of the landscaping. They're right at the top where the pavement for the first unit there is shown. Right there is a sign. as well
Grab your
across
mic.
the street. So those are also do not enter signs. And then the ones that are shown in the middle near the yellow tree there, both sided are fire lane do not park signs based on what the fire department had requested.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Bollinger.
Yes. And Mr. Rice, this may be slightly outside of the domain of this application. It might actually be condo association property, but as someone that frequents the Shell station, if you're using the entry onto, or the exit rather, onto Blackstone Drive, your sight distance is a little bit obscured by some vegetation. I'm not sure if it's the vegetation that's associated with the pump house or the pump station, or I think there's another sort of immature tree in that area. You're sort of within a horizontal curve, and I'm not sure if anything can necessarily be done, but I know we have a representative of perhaps of the condo association here, just with respect to just general maintenance and making sure you've got clear sight lines. That would really be my only other comment. So basically, looking left, coming out of the Shell onto Blackstone. And again, I realize that's not necessarily
Yeah,
within your.
Normally, I believe on somebody else's property. I can take a look. A couple pieces might be on our property, in which we are happy to cut back and clean up if needed, but I think most of them are on the abutter property.
Understood, but thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Harper?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Have you considered doing like a breakaway gate instead of the signage?
Actually, when we first submitted this, we did have a gate on that drive. When I coordinated with the fire department, they requested that I take it out. And
Okay.
then we suggested removable bollards, but they said that they've had issues with those freezing and locking up in the winter and such, and maintenance, and so I asked them flat out, what would you like? And that's what he suggested. He said, I'd just like the speed bump with do not enter signs, so that's what we've provided.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Meehan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was curious about, and this might be for Matt as well, about the new master plan, and part of the master plan was retrofitting the major corridors, including the Amherst Street corridor. Was that after you guys had completed all this project? Does it fit in with where the city was looking to go with the retrofitting? Has there been any discussion about that?
I haven't been made aware or had any discussions relative to that. I'm not sure if, Matt, you can
Sure,
fill me.
yeah, I'd be happy to answer. I would suggest that the design was likely completed before the plan was adopted. What I would say is that the vision for the Amherst Street
Is your
corridor
mic
seeks
on?
to.
Is your mic on? You can grab Scott's or something.
I'm not sure if it's on, but the general vision for the Amherst Street corridor is obviously the removal of large surface parking lots populated by a mix of residential and commercial uses. Certainly what's proposed here on the southern side with the gas station is somewhat compliant with that vision, but I believe the townhouse residential development is generally compatible with what we envision for this corridor. Although it's not a mixed-use parcel itself, I don't think it, cuts against what's in that master plan document in any form.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions by the board? Okay. Hearing none by the board, at this point, I will open it up to anybody in the public here in the audience. Wishing to speak in opposition or concern, have a question of the plan, please go ahead and come forward. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody, I'll open it up to folks on Zoom. If you have a question or want to speak in opposition or concern, go ahead and unmute, state your name and address for record. Seeing anybody? Matt? You see anybody?
I do not.
Okay. All right, seeing none, I will give the board one more opportunity to ask any questions of staff or the applicant. The only question I have for staff is regarding the, that additional waiver on the number of shrubs or whatever.
What we could do is,
Yeah.
the request for waiver, NRO 190, 181, we could leave out the B2 and just keep it general, and that would cover.
Oh, okay.
if
So
you
that's in
prefer.
190, 181?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, okay. So Just leave out the B2.
Yeah, and then maybe we can just specify when, whoever's making the motion can specify the parts of that
Right.
section that they're waiving.
The buffer and the plantings.
The buffer and the plantings.
Okay, all right. Any other questions for the applicant, by the board? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing on both of these applications. So we have a couple applications, the subdivision's pretty much just a technicality here, sounds like, just to get the condo piece squared away. It seems pretty straightforward. As far as the site plan goes, I mean, my 2 cents is this is way more desirable than the last. I mean, we've had several, I can't even think of how many I've seen come through for this site over the last 10 years or so. This appears to me to be the best use so far. So I'm kind of a big fan of it. No real concerns on my end. For those, you know, we've got the traffic in the Amherst Street corridor. Contribution seems to be okay with the applicant. I don't know how people feel about the fence versus the shrubs, whether they want to leave that up to staff to work with. I mean, I'll welcome any comments. Mr. Meehan?
Yeah, I mean, I think the condo association, it sounds like they're really working together well, and if they have input on it, and the city's included, that sounds great to me.
Ms. Harper?
I'd agree, and from a safety standpoint, having the fence there with the homes, I think it'd probably be a safer scenario, you know, for children or, you know, people near the road.
Yeah, okay. Other comments? Mr. Ballinger?
Yes, Mr. Chair, just a clerical item. What was the date of the most recent letter from Joe Mandola?
Assuming it's this November 30th.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually,
Okay.
12/1/2021.
Oh, sorry.
Just came.
Oh, you just got one? 'Cause
Yeah.
we have a November 30th one here, but.
You have November 3rd from Joe? Yeah.
In our packet.
That was in the additional supplemental material.
I think it, that was November 30th. Okay.
Should we use that date?
Just clarify that. Okay, yeah, it's just when it was received, I guess that's what's throwing me off. But yes,
Okay, so.
November 30th, you're correct.
The 30th is correct, yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Anybody want to make a motion on either one of these? Mr. Barley?
Chair, thank you. I would like to make a motion first on new business A21-0262 subdivision plan, and that would be a motion to approve, finding that the plan does meet the requirements outlined in site plan NRO section 190-146D, and that will be with a total of 3 stipulations, all of those stipulations reading as written in the staff report.
Okay, so we have that motion by Mr. Varley to approve case A21-0262 subdivision plan with the stipulations as stated. Do we have a second?
Second?
Second by Mr. Ballinger. Any further discussion by the board? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. That motion passes. Regarding the site plan?
Yeah, Scott?
Go ahead.
Would you want to, prior to the chair signing the plan, all comments and requests from Wayne Husband, Senior Traffic Engineer, dated 12/1/21, shall be addressed to the satisfaction of the Division of Public Works?
Yeah, that would be on the site plan, right? On the site
Right,
plan?
yeah, on the site plan.
Yep,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Yep. Okay. Anybody want to make a motion on the site plan? Mr. Barley, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I'd now like to make a motion on new business A21-0254 site plan. And again, that would be a motion to approve that plan with the finding that the plan does meet the requirements outlined in site plan NRO section 190-146D. And that will include a total of 11 stipulations. The first stipulation is a waiver request for a waiver from and this will be an amendment to the stipulation as written in the staff report, a request for a waiver from NRO section 190-181, and that will be specific to the buffer requirements and the number of plantings required under that ordinance. And that waiver will read is granted, will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulation. Stipulations number 2 and 3 will read as written in the staff report. Stipulation number 4 will be updated to include the date of November 30th, 2021. Stipulations 5 through 10 shall read as written in the staff report. And then I would add a new stipulation number 11 that will read, prior to the chair signing the plan, all comments in a letter from Wayne Husband, city traffic engineer, dated December 1st, 2021, shall be addressed to the satisfaction of the city traffic department.
Okay. All right, so we have that motion by Mr. Varley to approve the new business site plan A21-0254 with the stipulations as stated. Do we have a second on it? Second by Mr. Meehan. Any further discussion by the board? Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? None? That motion passes. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next up, we have new business site plan. This is case number A21-0256. This is an application, it's owner SD Realty LLC. Zafar Shandari applicant. This is an application and acceptance of proposed change of use to smoke shop and associated site improvements. Property is located at 303 Main Street. So has anybody from the board had a chance to take a look at this application? Want to make a motion as to whether it's ready for us to take jurisdiction? Mr. Bollinger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to accept jurisdiction over new business site plans, case A21-0256.
Okay, so we have that motion to take jurisdiction by Mr. Bollinger. Do we have a second? Second by Mr. Hirsch. Any further discussion by the board? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? None, that motion passes. So we have jurisdiction. Do we have somebody from the applicant that wants to present this site plan?
Yes, my name is Catherine Weiss. I'm with Bedford Design Consultants. We are the engineers for the project. I am a landscape architect and the project manager.
Okay.
Okay, let's start. This is not easy. Let's start with an overview of the site. The site is located on the corner of Lake and Main Street. It's bordered by the gas station to the north. Then to the right, on the east side, is the Shaw's Plaza. There's a laundromat in this section here, a bank, then Burger King, and Shaw's is over in this area. Over to the left is the Adult Learning Center, and to the south is a dentist office. There's intersection here is lighted. There's a four-way crosswalk on each side of the intersection. Lake Street itself is 3 lanes. 2 are heading towards the Shaw's Plaza, and 1 is heading away from downtown. And then Main Street, in this section, it is 5 lanes. 2 are coming south past the site, and there are 3 heading north. 1 of them is a turn lane into the Shaw's Plaza. This is the existing conditions plan. The site is currently abandoned at the moment. This used to be the Poor Pierre's restaurant. The site is paved all the way around the building. Sorry, it's hard to do this right-handed. There's a little bit of grass in the south portion, retaining wall here. We have overhead wires coming into a pole and to the building. An air conditioning unit in the back. Basically, a lot of the pavement is coming up. It looks a little worn, a little worn out. The building itself has suffered a little bit from graffiti. So there's also a sidewalk that runs along two portions of the site on the frontage. And then right here is a signal button to cross, use the crosswalk. You can go either in this direction or in this direction across Main and Lake. I'm going to skip the demolition plan and go right into the site plan. We talked with engineering and fire. They had some comments about the project. And we ended up all agreeing with some modifications that it was okay to come in off of Main Street with a one-way. So the circulation will enter from Main Street. We have 4 parking spaces on the left. One is accessible with an accessible aisleway up to an accessible ramp, and then the accessible entrance is here. Then as you come around the corner of the building, we have an employee parking space. We have the dumpster here. The air conditioning unit will remain. And then we have the exit to the site will be one left-hand turn lane and a right-hand turn lane. Each can hold 1 car on each side. And as part of that, because this is one way, there are do not enter signs here, as well as a do not block intersection sign on the utility pole here, and a square in the road. We discussed how it would be best to have something like this here so that people could leave taking a left, because there are 2 lanes to cross, and then as you have people coming in from either the light through here, or taking a right without a light, they tend to speed up as they get through here, so we wanted to make sure that there'd be a safe way for people to get out. Although I don't think it's going to be too much of a problem, except maybe on a really busy day. I live nearby, so it's not, I've walked to Shaw's often. Let's see, we added to the sidewalks tip downs here and here to make them accessible. And also, as I mentioned, this was all paved before, so now we have a 20-foot opening here and a 12-foot opening in here instead of a huge, just paved area. We're also going to be adding an accessible warning strip here at this intersection. There currently isn't anything like that to allow for accessibility. Grading and drainage. So right now, the site all just flows, water just flows down the site, out this way and down the street. There's a catch basin about 100 feet down the road. So we asked for a waiver for a drainage report. We're taking out a lot of pavement. This is going to be grass now. This will be grass. This will be grass. And all of this in here will be grass. So we will be reducing the water flow from the site just by taking out a lot of the pavement. This is the landscape plan, proposing shrubs around the outside of the building. There'll be low foundation shrubs along the frontage here where it's facing Lake and Main. There are existing windows that go pretty low to the ground, so these shrubs will stay below that so that you can still see out the windows. I do show some evergreen shrubs here. There's just a blank wall here to kind of cover that up, and then over here by the dumpster. And then a few evergreen shrubs here to block the AC unit. And then we've got perennials along the side here and in the front and in these planting beds. Let's get to the architectural. So we didn't do anything different for the architectural. They're planning on painting the building white. And right now there's some orange details on the building. Those are also going to be painted white. I kind of drew them in here just real quick just to give you an idea of what will be white. There's also some orange little strips along the front. Those will also be white. This is the front right here of the building that faces Main Street. There is a sign currently there that says Pour Pierre's. We're proposing a smoke shop sign there in the same place, same size, just as it is now. And then on top of the building is a roof sign, an existing roof sign that says Pour Pierre's right now. We're going to replace that with a smoke shop sign. That's a really bad picture. Let me open up a better one. Smoker's Lane and 303 are in red. It has a yellow background, and you can't tell it here, but the smoke shop is actually like a navy blue. So this sign is visible from Lake Street, and it's basically as you're heading up and down Main Street, you can see this sign. The sign, I don't know right now because it has not been in use for a while. If the sign is already internally illuminated, then they're going to keep that and reuse that. If it's not, then they won't. I just wanted to let you know that it might be an internally illuminated sign, but it has not been up long enough for me to know it's been out of commission for a while. So, and lastly are the waivers. We have 7 waivers. They're all basically related to this being a change of use site plan in an existing site. We asked for a waiver from the lighting plans. There is a light on the site right here on a light pole, which I think will be good enough to illuminate the parking. Plus, we're right on Main Street. There's plenty of lighting there. The second one is for a building design for non-residential buildings. We are just going to use the existing building that's there and spruce it up a bit. The next one is for the stormwater management report. As I mentioned before, we're reducing the amount of pavement. Traffic impact analysis. There's not a lot going on here. It's a very small little building. It's about 1,200 square feet, 1,220 square feet. And we only have a few parking spaces, so we're not concerned with that. I did get an email today from Wayne Husband about paying the fees for the trips, and the owner is fine with that. The next ones are a little more confusing. We did one for, currently, all new projects need to have underground utilities. We're requesting that the electric still remain above ground since it's that way already. Also, when you do a project, you're supposed to show buildings and utilities off of the site. We did not show those, so just because it's also an existing site. So I think that's pretty much it. If you have any questions.
Okay, so I'll open up to the board. Any questions for the applicant? Mr. Ballinger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just with respect to traffic flow, I understand the intent of the driveway on Main Street is basically enter only. Is that prohibition for exiting vehicles reinforced in any way? I don't see any do not enter
No,
signs.
that happened in between when we spoke. One of the requirements in the letter from Joe Mandola is that there's a do not enter exit sign on this portion as well.
Okay.
I don't know how people would get out that way because it's angled parking. They kind of have to back out and go out that way anyways. But yes, there will be signage there.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions for the board? Mr. Meehan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just reading some of the emails and some of the discussion around it, and I'm looking at your landscape plan, and I have Google Earth up on my laptop. Has there been any thought about additional screening behind the building, between the building, the site itself, since you're adding some green space anyway, and the learning center that's adjoining?
Currently, there's a wall right on the other side of the property. It's pretty tall. So you can see here, the old pavement runs right along this dotted line right there. So it's pretty well hidden. There's also a 4-foot fence on top of that wall. It's a iron fence. It looks like it's been around for a while. I know this area will be all cleaned up, but there's such a height difference. It's not really something that I think would be a problem, but if you would like some evergreens, we could put some here or here. I don't think that would be a problem.
Question?
I have a question
Go
for
ahead,
staff.
Mr. Barley. Yep.
I understand that the way this is framed is a site plan for change of use as opposed to a conditional use permit. Does that mean that this use is permitted by right?
I'm happy you asked that question, Mr. Barley. We received several emails questioning the permissive nature of this zoning district relative to the use. This use is treated as a retail use. Retail is fully permitted within the zoning district. We do not differentiate the products being sold in that retail context, and therefore this is a permitted use, yes.
So the change of use then, the requirement to come before the board for the change of use is under a different provision of the zoning, not related to the type of use, but.
That's correct. We had substantial conversations with the tenant earlier in the process about the non-conforming nature of the site, not from a use perspective, but from a site plan design perspective. Ultimately, we agreed that due to safety issues related to the site, we felt that an update to the site was necessary to address some of that. We recognize that what's proposed does require some waivers, but we are supportive of it as, again, an improvement to a non-conforming site. But it's not necessarily the change of use that triggers its review. It's the non-conformity of the site within the context of the site plan regulations.
Great, thank you.
Other questions by the board? Okay. Not hearing any, I'll go ahead and open this to the public. Is anybody in the audience wishing to speak in opposition, concern?
Katie, could you take your screen share down just for a moment?
Sure.
Sorry.
So you can come on up and just state your name and address for record and your concern or question.
My name's Alderman Elizabeth Liu. I'm here tonight on behalf of residents of Ward 6 who have expressed concern to me about the establishment of a tobacco shop within such close proximity to the Elm Street Junior High. There exists another retail tobacco outlet less than 2/10 of a mile away, and this the road that these are both on are a walk to school or schools. It's not a school zone, but it's a path that most students who are walking there from Ward 4 or Ward 6 would be coming from. And so I just wanted to convey that I've heard that there are people that are concerned about this. I would like some clarification if I could. I guess I'm not sure if I can ask questions, but is this a smoke, like a cigar shop for people to go and sit and smoke in?
Well, you just go ahead and ask your questions and we'll track them and I'm sure
Okay.
the applicant will.
And
yeah.
if it were something like the one that's downtown, I know that they often, it's more of a hospitality or service type of establishment that sets up tables, and so I don't think that really is retail. But if it is retail to me, so I'm just curious whether it would be exactly like the other store that's about 2/10 away.
Okay,
Thank you.
we'll ask that question. Thanks. Anybody, hang on a second. Yeah. Anybody online wishing to speak in opposition, concern, or have a question for the plan? I see one hand maybe.
Yes.
Go ahead and unmute and state your
Carol
name
Baldwin.
and address.
Hi, my name is Carol Baldwin. I am a resident of Nashua at 42 Diamondback Avenue in Nashua, but I'm speaking as the executive director of the Adult Learning Center, which abuts the property that we're discussing. And I also want to thank the members of my team who took time out to be on this meeting tonight. I vehemently oppose the decision to allow a smoke shop at 303 Main Street. This sends such a bad message to the children in our schoolyard, which abuts the shop, and contrary to what was just said, these children can see that building clearly. It's a chain link fence with a few slats. These are 3, 4, and 5-year-olds who would be looking at this, and this is just, what kind of city allows a smoke shop next to a school? It sends a really, really bad message. The children in our care are low-income families. They're dealing with a lot. We work with them very carefully to help them make good decisions, to talk about nutrition and healthy living. This goes completely against everything that we do to help struggling families thrive. Further, we're licensed by the State of New Hampshire Child Care Licensing Division, and their regulations prohibit smoking within sight of children. Who can assure us that this isn't going to happen? This afternoon, I took a drive to the smoke shop south of Main Street and the smoke shop north of us. And at both locations, that's exactly what I saw. And that's not a judgmental statement. It's just that that's what people do, and it's unhealthy. It sends a bad message, and I'm really in sincere opposition to this. And I would like to allow our Director of Child Care, Jane Markey, to make a few comments. She's the expert in child care development, and she can speak to the impact of this. And thank you for allowing me to speak.
Okay, thanks.
Good evening.
Go ahead, yep.
Hi, yes, okay. I don't know who you can see and who you can't, but anyway, I'm Jane Markey, and I also live in Nashua. I'm a native. I live at 4 Farley Street up here in the north end, and I've been with the Adult Learning Center for nearly 30 years, and that playground has really, our outdoor spaces have really worked hard to keep them as appropriate for the children, healthy. We've even built a greenhouse. We do gardening with them. We keep natural objects outside because we are a city playground. There were times when we struggled being next door to Poor Pierre's with just the reeking garbage, the garbage holder. It was just, terrible, and it would get really hot out. And I know that that's just life or whatever, but to know that we would have to expose our very young children, we even have 1 and 2-year-olds on the toddler side, to secondhand smoke and inhaling it, but as well as seeing what's happening. And I'll echo Carol, our executive director, and not trying to sound judgmental, but an establishment like that can attract all kinds of people, and we're not sure, the fence does have slats. We don't keep the children in a bubble. The traffic that could come in and out of there on foot and in cars could be questionable to us in terms of how our children will perceive what's happening, and these are citizens of Nashua as well. So we're trying to advocate here for this most vulnerable population. And even that idea, I'm just going to say it, and I'm not a traffic person, but I've been there for so long, turning left out of there onto Lake Street is a nightmare waiting to happen. I'm just going to tell you. I can hear it. I can hear the screeches now of the cars. I can hear the people yelling and swearing. It's just going to be very scary, and I know that there's careful planning, and I'm not an architect, so, and I don't play on TV, but I think there's a lot to look at here, but the bottom line is the health and safety of the children. There are child care licensing unit regulations. Child care licensing regulations are legislated by the state of New Hampshire. We have to follow them closely and carefully. We're also accredited, in those criteria call for children never ever seeing anyone smoke, even off-site. So they can look through. And again, we don't keep them in a bubble. We don't have a top over the playground. We keep them engaged. We keep them busy. I know through the years sometimes our toys would get thrown over, but we try to clean them up. We try to be good neighbors to everyone. But this is just, it really is a very, very inappropriate juxtaposition of a business and a school. And I will go to bat for the middle schoolers too, who are the most impressionable, and Elm Street being just down the road. I wish Mayor Donchis was on this, because we all know him. I'm his neighbor. I'm in Rotary with him, everything. How many more tattoo parlors and smoke shops do we need in Nashua? Really? We're trying to promote health and well-being and education and all that. And it's really a harmful thing to consider to have that close to our centers and our schools. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks. Anybody else wishing to speak in opposition or concern or have a question of the plan?
Looks like Margaret has her hand raised.
Is there a Margaret? A hand raised by Margaret online, but I'm not hearing anything.
No.
Okay. Nope.
No.
Can't hear anymore? Okay. All right. Hearing no further public wishing to speak, I will go ahead and give the applicant a chance to rebut or address some of the comments. You know, I guess there was one particularly with regard to smoking on the premises, things like that.
Yeah.
You know, if you could kind of
I'll
address
address
that.
the first woman's comments.
Yep.
The smoke shop, from what I believe, is just selling trinkets and things and paraphernalia. I don't believe it's a place where people are going to be sitting down and smoking like the Smoker's Haven is. That's what I understand. And then, from what I understand from ALC, I don't know what I can do. I'm thinking we could add some more screening in. If I could share my screen again.
You're
Yep.
welcome to, yeah.
Okay, so thinking about that along here, we have this employee parking space. I could possibly move it somewhere else so I can have a full area to do screening along here. I don't know if the owners, I have to talk to them, if we could possibly put sign up saying, please do not smoke outside. Those are the only things I can really think of that might be helpful.
Okay. Questions by the board? Mr. Meehan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm thinking about that, I have a note here about that left turn on the Lake Street too, and having gone up and down that street many, many times.
Yep.
It is really hard to imagine how that's going to work.
Well, when we looked at it, we were thinking it would be harder to take a left into the site from Lake Street if you were going to switch it. Because you've got to go past 2 lanes to get into the site, and then you've stopped. And any traffic that's coming from Main Street, from Shaw's or wherever, would have to stop as well. So it was how is the intersection going to work with the light kind of a thing? So that's why we chose to do it from the Main Street side, because you could get right into the site. And people can wait to take a left out or a right out if they need to. But coming in is a little more dangerous. So that's why we went this way.
And
Go ahead.
If I
Yep.
could just make one other comment, Google Earth is lovely for these things. You can actually go into the parking lot at the Learning Center
Okay.
and look back through the playground into
Okay.
the parking lot at.
Yeah, I assume you would from up above.
Yeah.
I was thinking more like from our site looking out, because the
Yeah.
wall's there, but yes,
The
if you're up
closeness
above, I
is
can see that.
profound. I mean, it's,
It's exposed. Yep, well, like I said, we could look into trying to move that employee parking space a bit and then get some tall evergreen shrubs in there. That's what I can think of would work for screening, because putting a 6-foot fence up isn't going to do that much, I think, because they're up, like, I think 4 feet already with that wall, and then, so it would only give like 2 feet of screening, so the children are taller than that. So I think an evergreen screen would work best.
Is the fence above on the property of the school?
Yeah,
or-
yeah, the retaining wall and the fence are on the school property.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so if you had to build a taller, you'd have to build on their property.
If they were going to have a taller fence on their side of
Yeah.
the property, yeah, I would have to go on their already existing wall.
Yeah. Mr. Varley?
I have a follow-up question for staff. The question was raised about, smoking on site, and I think the comparison was being made to Castro's on Main Street, where people do go in and sit down and smoke cigars. Would that be, from a zoning perspective, different than a retail use? In other words, would that be in a different analysis in terms of the permission of the use?
I would have to verify that, but it seems that would be retail, predominantly retail, but it would also be maybe restaurant lounge type category.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Matt's more familiar with the zoning classification for the Castros.
I don't know the zoning classification for Castro's, but I would note that tobacco and tobacconist is a permitted use in both the D1 and the D3 zones. So whatever is proposed here is certainly a permitted use, whether it's a mix of restaurant, retail, or tobacco or tobacconist.
Yeah, so that was my question, essentially,
Yep.
was if it were not just the sale of products, but if it were on-premises use, that wouldn't change the permissibility of it? Or wouldn't change, if, for example, they were to propose, retail only, would that be a different, and then they were to add, for example, an on-site, use would that require coming back to the planning board? That would be within the permission of the...
No, it would not. I mean, I think the one exception to that would be any kind of outdoor smoking area. That would certainly, any kind of patio area that's created would require some level of board review. But if smoking is established within the building, that is a fully permissible use. Would require no approvals through the city that I'm aware of.
Unless parking is involved.
Correct. So I don't see any issue with the use itself. So, yes, I hope that answers the question.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Peterson?
Two questions. So will this establishment sell tobacco and vaping products?
I assume so. I do not know the answer to that.
Excuse me?
I assume so, but I do not know the answer to that.
Okay, my other question is, would the owner of this establishment be willing to pay for a taller fence to obstruct the view to the adult learning center?
I can certainly ask.
Okay. So, Mr. Meehan?
I'm just looking, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking at the plan again, and if the applicant did agree to increase the planting on the border of the abutter, the learning center, that's also where the snow storage is planned, does that create another problem for them, or is that, I don't know if you guys, is that measured, or?
Yeah, I don't know, my 2 cents is if we're looking at situations that change the plan to the point of it affects the abutter, you know, we may want to get that on the plan and then address it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we're still in the hearing, but I want to leave the hearing open because I want you to hear what I'm talking about so that you have the opportunity to respond and say whether, you know, it looks to me like there's potential the board is looking for changes to the plan. It sounds like you're amenable to those. You know, we do have mechanisms to allow you to make those changes. It sounds like you would be.
I'd have to talk to the owner.
Right, which
obviously,
we can give you that
yeah.
opportunity. I think there's also questions about the use and the, you know, whether it's retail, what's being sold, you know, what's being consumed on site and others. I think those are all great questions. In absence, you know, and I guess, I assume the owner could even come back here and be in front of us as well.
He's in New York, but he
We
could
can Zoom
probably
in
do
or
Zoom,
something.
yeah.
Yeah, something like that, right? So anyway, that's my thoughts. Anyone that want to ask any more questions? I want to make sure if you have any more questions of the applicant during the hearing, you ask now, the board, yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's just more of a general comment that I guess I would like the applicant to be aware of.
Yeah.
If there were to be a higher screening on the subject site, I believe the city has code law with respect to height of fences, and I guess I didn't want to necessarily be back into a variant situation. If you're proposing a 20-foot high fence, then if there was something to be done, and if both parties were amenable, the abutter and the applicant, it might make sense to possibly build up what is on the learning center side, as opposed to this applicant trying to erect a new 20-foot section of fence. That's strictly commentary, and perhaps someone on staff might be able to speak more eloquently to that matter, with regard to overall fence height and things of that nature.
So correct. 6 foot is the trigger for both a building permit and when we get into potential structural setback issues as well. I would just note more of an editorial comment. I think regardless of the permissive nature of the use, clearly some uses require more buffer from other uses within a certain zone, whether that's strictly codified within the site plan review regulations or not. I think this is an example where maybe an enhanced buffer would be beneficial to both of the property owners. And I think to the question, what we would encourage the applicant to do after this hearing tonight is to interface with the abutter and design some sort of mutually agreeable solution that allows both uses to function in harmony, whether that's, hopefully that's possible. But it does sound like additional information is available, and certainly we would not want to do plan amendment via discussion this evening, so I
Yeah.
support whatever the board's direction is.
Yeah, I would
after this.
agree, yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions, Mr. Hudson?
It's not so much a question, Mr. Chair, but it's just more of some additional observations. The point about the fence is well taken. It's noted that the existing fence has slats and then spaces and slats. Like if the whole thing had the slats installed, then that would provide a much better buffer. Right now, it's kind of a peekaboo fence. I would also point out that I do understand the proximity to this use, but there's also a sidewalk that goes right by this site, and somebody could be walking down the sidewalk smoking, and they're less than 3 feet away from the fence and the children beyond, or driving by in a car and smoking. I mean, I'm not particularly fond of the use either, but that issue with smoking being potentially present and visible by children exists both on the street and in this abutting use. From looking at the street view, there's a wall with like a wrought iron fence, and then the abutter's fence is above that. And I am concerned about adding another fence and trying to get a height that would screen. You'd end up with 3 fences, one very tall, one hidden between the two, and so certainly something should be worked out. In terms of traffic operations, my hope is that after the Lake Street phase goes green and then exits, there'll be opportunities for people to turn left out of the site, because they should have no traffic coming from Main Street at that point in time. So hopefully that would create some gaps and regular opportunities for them to exit. The points about trying to exit on a Main Street in a reverse direction, that would be a challenging exercise as well. So, the use is what it is as proposed and allowed, and the applicant has been very gracious in working with us to try to come up with a site plan configuration, I think, makes the best of this difficult location. So those would be my observations, I guess.
Okay. Anybody else on the board while we're in the hearing? Mr. Peterson?
I just have a comment. That is, I think to have this establishment which sells both addictive and physically harmful products to the public in close proximity to the middle school. Maybe the middle school kids aren't old enough to buy these things, but it does not send a good message, in my opinion, even though legally it may be within the allowable parameters.
Yeah, do you have any questions for the applicant? Because I'm okay with comments and things like that, but traditionally the hearing is for asking questions of the applicant. I can close it and we can get into the meeting, but does anybody have any more questions for the applicant at this time? No? Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing. Yeah, and then on the comment side, Mike's comments intended. I think this is a tough application, I agree. I think there's some missing information too, and I think there's some, like, really understanding the nature of the use. And, we have, Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we've definitely limited the usage via site plan in the past. I mean, we limit hours, we limit all kinds of things, we can. So I would really like an opportunity to speak to the owner of how they're gonna actually operate it. And, we have remote function now, which is, we should take advantage of it, as far as I'm concerned. And then I think we have some buffer issues that probably need a little bit more discussion between the butters and some engineering. So I'd be in favor of tabling this and giving the applicant an opportunity to address some of those things and come back before us. Mr. Varley?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would concur on the suggestion in terms of tabling, because I do think it's important to have the applicant here to address some of these issues. I'm also, sympathetic to the concerns about the use, and I would echo what Mr. Hudson said. It would not be my preferred use either. I have a 7th grader down the street right now, so I get it. With that said, I think even to the extent that we might be limiting, in some respects, the type of use, I mean, it seems to me there is a threshold issue of has a policy decision already been made within the zoning code about what is a permitted use here? And I think the answer to that question is yes. So I don't think the ultimate question is this a use that we can allow here? I think that decision has been made. So I think it does go more to the issues of discussing with the applicant in a more appropriate buffer if we think that's right, or discussing limitations perhaps on, smoking activities on the property. So that, I guess that's the only caveat I would offer in terms of tabling this, is that I think, at least in my view, there's a degree to which we have to accept that this is simply a use that's permitted under the zoning code, whether we like it or not, and we should do our best to mitigate the impacts of that as we can within the contours of the zoning code.
Mr. Meehan?
Yeah, thank you. I echo all of that, and I do appreciate the effort to landscape and to create a much better looking space. I mean, it really is kind of an eyesore in that very, very prominent spot. I think it's also important for us to consider Carol Baldwin's comment regarding, I think it was state mandates regarding sight lines and smoking, and I'm not sure exactly what that meant, but perhaps that's something Matt can zero in on, or is there some kind of superseding state law or federal regulation that would prohibit this kind of a usage? Does that supersede? I have no idea, but I think that would be an important point.
Yeah.
I really respect Carol and all that she's done at the Learning Center. I think she must have something important to look at there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just echo, though, that we have to be careful that when someone puts their site, i.e. whether it's a learning center or whatever it is, in a location that's adjacent to a commercially zoned site, you're incumbent on doing things on your site to manage your requirements. And this is, I liken this to the folks that, they sometimes come to the board and they don't want people to cut trees on their neighbor's site, but they have no trees on their site. We have to balance that always, So it's not always the adjacent site's responsibility to deal with issues on somebody else's site. So.
With all due respect, we have been.
We're not, the hearing's not open right now, so we can't take comment. There could be another opportunity for you in another venue, so, but, anyway, that's what I'm thinking is, we just have to balance that, I mean, have to be careful with it, so. Mr. Meehan?
Chair, would you like a motion to table?
Yeah, I think it seems like the board, unless anybody is not amenable to, we can make the motion and see if people are amenable to that. My gut feeling is they are. But it should be specific to why and what information we want of the applicant, so. I don't know if somebody's ready to put that together.
Did you want to make, I wasn't sure if you were suggesting you wanted to make that.
I was going to simply motion to table, but
Yeah, if you've got
these
that
additional
info,
stipulations, I'm not exactly sure what.
May I just say one thing?
Go ahead, Mr. Beard.
Before we come up with the proper wording, I think it would be useful if we could pinpoint what the New Hampshire Child Care Licensing Division regulation is, so we can read it and hear what they have to say, because, this is not a complete description. If we just knew what that was called, whatever that reference number is, we can look it up and read and see what is said.
We could ask staff to help out with that,
Yeah, if the staff could provide that, that would be very useful.
Go ahead, Mr. Bollinger.
Mr. Chair, my only concern, possibly going down that route for informational purposes, I think it may be useful. However, there's a Shell station right across Lake Street that also sells alcohol and tobacco within almost the same proximity. There's a mini market, the R's Mini Market, a little bit further down the road that presumably sells alcohol
Yeah.
and tobacco products, same as Walgreens. So I think to Mr. Varley's point earlier, if it's a permitted use, I would be supportive of a motion to continue, but I would be supportive if we were to stick to the issues that Mr. Hudson alluded to with regarding buffers, with regarding on-site, if there's on-site circulation questions, but I think we potentially, and again, that's not necessarily being necessarily in favor of the ultimate use, but is it a permitted use? Are we meeting all the legal requirements? So that would be, that's just my general thoughts, and I would be supportive of a continuance, but I do support sort of a confined nature of that continuance.
Yeah, and I would recommend that as well. Right. So somebody want to make the motion?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Hudson.
I mean, I'm in favor of tabling this, so the screening issues and other things can be addressed. I'm just wondering if we should take up any of the waiver requests or not, and, so that they have guidance going forward on whether it's going to be acceptable to the board or not. Because if they're not, there's going to be additional work that they need to do to address.
Yes, that's a good point. Does anybody have any issues with any of the waivers that have been suggested? I mean, essentially, there's the building elevations, lighting, the stormwater report, the traffic analysis, and the utilities, but.
The only one, the only one I had any objection to, I think, is the not showing on-site utilities. And I understand they're not making significant changes to the, to the site, but I think it's just helpful to have site plans reflect existing utilities on their site.
Yeah.
Having said that, I don't know if there's previous site plans that do show those, that they can easily, transpose to these plans or not. So that's, without knowing that or what the issues are, that's the only one I would not be in favor of tonight. I mean, I understand don't show
Yeah, and I'm
stuff
sure
on
the
other
applicant's
properties.
listening to us, and if they can get back more information, they can try to mitigate that.
I know we did provide a copy of what we had on file anyway for the sewer service, for example, so they could, show that as approximate or something, as one example.
Okay. All right, somebody want to make a motion? Mr. Barley, did you have you keeping notes on that?
Sure. Yeah, notes right here.
Okay.
So I would make a motion to table new business A21-0256 site plan. And I would table that, I apologize, I don't know when our next meeting is.
January 6th.
January 6th. I would make that motion to table the case until our January 6th, 2022 meeting. And the purpose of that tabling would be to provide an opportunity to hear from the owner applicant as to the issues regarding traffic circulation and buffering, and also to allow a discussion to occur between the applicant and the Adult Learning Center as to a potential solution for the buffering. And also to hear from the applicant as to the more specific details about the nature of the use.
Okay, so we have that motion to table by Mr. Varley for what's indicated. We have a second first. Second by Mr. Meehan. Any further discussion by the board? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? All right, so that motion's tabled to the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, appreciate it. Thank you, everybody in the public, too, for your comments, appreciate it. Okay, so next up, we have on our agenda just a review of our tentative agenda for proposals of regional impact. Has anybody had a chance to take a look at that? Want to make a motion? Someone in the packet here. Mr. Riley, have you seen it? Anybody seen it? Actually, I'm not sure we have it.
I would have made the motion, but I don't think
Where
I
is it?
saw it.
Yeah, maybe we don't have it in this one? Okay, that's all right. If we don't have it, we don't have it, so. I'll pass on that one. Next up, we have the referral from Board of Aldermen on proposed 021-073, amending inclusionary zoning supplemental use regs. Matt, are you going to talk?
I will, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt Sullivan, Planning Department Manager for the city. Thank you, members of the board, for taking the opportunity this evening to hear about an exciting update that we are proposing to the City of Nashua zoning ordinance relative to inclusionary zoning. I was going to provide a more sizable introduction to this and introduce the consultant who's joining us virtually this evening, but I'll be brief in my introduction just to say that
This inclusionary zoning is really the first step that we are taking from an implementation perspective forward after the 2020 housing study that was performed by the City of Nashua and sponsored substantially by the Board of Aldermen, and of course, hopefully reviewed by all of you in some form as well. Subsequent to that 2020 housing study, the city contracted with RKG Associates to perform a feasibility analysis about the current inclusionary zoning ordinance, current development trends within the community, and to also begin laying the groundwork for an update to the existing inclusionary zoning ordinance, which does exist in our current land use code. Subsequently, we worked with both RKG and also GOV Planning Strategies to draft an update
to that section of the code. We're presenting that to you this evening.
Our hope is that we can seek positive recommendation from the board and bring this back to the Board of Aldermen for final consideration by the end of 2021.
Mr. Kyle Talente is joining us this evening via Zoom. He's going to provide a brief presentation, not only about the content of the ordinance itself, but also a brief background of how we got here and why inclusionary zoning is so critical. Kyle, I don't know if you're prepared to take the baton handoff at this point, but I want to invite you to jump in here and take us down a journey, I think, how we got here and where we're headed as far as this inclusionary zoning ordinance goes. After that, we'll do some questions, and certainly this is a complex ordinance, so either Kyle or I will be available to answer those questions as they come.
Yep. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt, and good evening, everybody. Matt, I don't know if the PowerPoint is being shared there or not.
Kyle, maybe that's the one thing we didn't cover on our pre-call, but I was planning for you to share it. If not, I can absolutely do that.
Hold on. I can absolutely do that. Give me one moment. Not a problem. As soon as I figure out share screen, let's see. There we go. Share. All right. Can you see it?
We can.
Yep.
Excellent. Wonderful. Well, thank you again for having me this evening. As Matt said, we're going to kind of walk you through how we got here and then what we did to try and provide the recommendation to the city. I'm not going to read everything on the slides. This was, as Matt mentioned, my partner Eric Halverson did a housing study for the city last year. And this is some of the findings from that analysis that led us to this inclusionary zoning strategy effort. And like I said, I'm not going to read everything on here. The main ones I want to pull away, you see highlighted in yellow, that Nashua is a growing city. It's projected to increase its population over the next 9 years by another 8,000 residents. Well, that's not going to be folks having children and increasing their household sizes. And so the demand for new housing within the community is real. There's a large component of that are 1- and 2-person households. So the need for a diversification of the housing within the city is definitely not only warranted but demanded by the marketplace. And then finally, the two things I want to focus on is the rising values of homes and the rising costs of rent in the city of Nashua. And that's really what led us to this, the primary factors that led us to this inclusionary zoning process, which is, okay, we're seeing that there's additional demand for housing, and that the price for housing, not just new construction, but for existing housing, is going up and exceeding, even the middle ground households, that missing middle, if you will, of households that historically haven't been able to find options and opportunities within the city are starting to struggle to do that. This graphic, and there's a very similar graphic in the housing study report for the rental housing market, but really what I want to focus on is that bar, those two bars all the way to the right side, which say above 120% of AMI. And the dark blue bar is the demand from households, and the light blue bar is the number of housing units that are available to them in that price point. And what this all means really is that the interest of households, not just those who are already here in Nashua, but those who are coming to Nashua, are they have resources, and they are coming with resources. And so it is natural within a market environment for the development community to target and focus development on the greatest unmet need that has the greatest ability to pay, because that is how you create your greatest returns on investment. And so this graphic is not showing just what is today, but if I showed you another graphic of how it has changed in the past 10 years, you would see that a predominance of the growth of households within the community are more well off. And as a result, not only are driving what new construction house is costing, but as I mentioned, the cost of existing housing units. And so one of the recommendations that came out of the study was to update your existing inclusionary zoning policy. To be frank, the existing policy really wasn't very effective the way it was written. It was not, first off, was not compulsory, but more importantly, it was written in a manner that made it very challenging to understand and very challenging to execute and be financially viable. And so our recommendation, and my partner Eric's recommendation, was to take a look at your existing IZ policy and then do a financial feasibility analysis to understand what potential IZ options are out there for the city of Nashua. And this is twofold. The reason was twofold. One is that, as I mentioned, housing prices are going up. New construction is unobtainable to folks earning in that 80% of AMI range. Well, anything from 80% of AMI range and below. And two is that 80% range is the one being left out because there are no federal programs, particularly on the rental side. There are no federal programs that provide assistance to mitigate costs of construction or mitigate costs of operation to then try and drive affordability. And so we were charged, and this is where I took over from Eric, to take a look at the financial feasibility of various options in an inclusionary zoning policy and come up with some strategies. So the four primary things that we identified are, as I mentioned, that missing middle housing. There are developments that have gone on in the city of Nashua that target households earning 50%, 60%, and below of AMI, and obviously the market is targeting incomes at and above 100% of AMI, but the market really isn't addressing the needs of those in that middle category. The second thing was, as I mentioned already, your enforcing a policy is going to be challenging because right now, because the city has tried to induce new development, especially in the downtown, things like increasing densities on the property and then providing financial subsidies are already being done just for market rate housing. And so that was another issue, a challenge, not regardless of what the IZ policy is, that we learned, which is those are usually tools that are extremely effective at providing that strategy to have an IZ policy be successful. RKG's approach to inclusionary zoning, and excuse me, when I say IZ, I mean inclusionary zoning, but RKG's approach to advising communities on inclusionary zoning is to do what we call revenue neutral, which is how can we create a policy that provides the types of housing or that achieves the goal that the city is trying to accomplish, but does so in a manner that doesn't adversely affect the financial feasibility of a project. And that's a very important component because the goal here is not to disrupt the development of new activity, new housing within the city, but try and do it in a manner that provides opportunities for a continuum of incomes, not just the lowest and the highest that are coming to the community. The third thing that we found that helped advise the IZ policy that we are recommending is location impacts feasibility. Most notably in the downtown, the scale of properties, the development intensity, the need for structured parking in particular creates a different financial reality that investors, developers have to address. And so you'll see when we get to the policy discussion that we have recommended different strategies for different areas of the city. And that's a hallmark of a good IZ policy is you recognize the fact that you can't really do a one-size-fits-all strategy. And that really gets into that what we call the dynamic inclusionary zoning policy, or a policy that understands what we're trying to accomplish and then creates opportunities for flexibility so that, while not every area of the city is the same, but also not every project is the same. And so by being able to provide some flexibility in the policy, you can work with a developer investor to try and solve some challenges rather than it being punitive. It's definitely put you in a position as a city where you say, okay, well, there's some opportunities here where we can work together to try and address, maybe there's something very specific that we need to deal with. And so, with the solutions that we talked about, and very quickly, the first one is target that missing middle. We heard some comments during the Alderman meetings of folks wanting to get to lower area median incomes or lower income levels, and we definitely understand and appreciate that. But once again, what we recognize and we've learned through our research is there are already programs out there that can help accomplish providing housing for those folks. So, for example, the Housing and Urban Development U.S. HUD Department offers a low-income housing tax credit program for multifamily developments that target households at 60% of AMI or below. And so there are other federal programs. That was just an example that target that group. And obviously, the market is going to cater to the more affluent, to the what we call market rate households, because those are the ones that generate the greatest returns. It's the missing middle that are really the ones that are going to be left out of development, if you will, particularly of new construction development within the city. And so our recommendation is targeting the 80% of AMI range. The second one is value inclusionary percentage based on the size of development. Our analysis that we did for this effort showed that smaller projects, 10 units, 15 units, 20 units, are more sensitive to those financial shifts of requiring a unit to be priced at a certain level below market than larger projects, 100, 200, so forth and so on, unit counts. And so our recommendation is, first of all, the smallest projects, those under 10 units, shouldn't be required to provide inclusionary at all. 10 to 25 should be 10%, up to 26 up to 115, and you can see the recommendation here. And the reason for this is very simple. When we did the math analysis of the financial feasibility, we learned those larger projects have the ability to absorb those higher percentages of having price-appropriate housing at that 80% of AMI range. Third is to create separate thresholds for downtown. I mentioned already that the financial realities of developing in downtown are different than those elsewhere in the city, and so the IZ policy that we are recommending has different thresholds for downtown projects than for elsewhere in the city. The other part that we learned through the housing study, which is the reason why we recommended this, is there are already many of those projects that are targeting lower-income households are already being developed in downtown or have been developed in downtown. And so the goal here is not to concentrate all the more affordable units in one area, but to provide housing choice throughout the city. And so this is one where we say, first, let's recognize the fact that the costs are different to develop downtown. And second, let's recognize the fact that the goal here isn't to just concentrate in one area, but to provide folks who earn that 80% of AMI range a choice, that they don't have to live downtown. That's not their only option in the community. Excuse me, did I? And then finally, use a bonus density program to mitigate the impacts on financial feasibility. And I go back to the comment I made earlier about trying to be financially neutral or cost neutral to the developer. When you're developing housing, like let's take ownership, for example, the market right now is developing ownership housing at 140% of the area median income. So meaning households that earn 140% above what the median income is what the price points are targeting in terms of affordability. And so when you're developing to that, to require a unit at 80% of AMI or even 100% of AMI, obviously is going to have a negative financial impact on the deal. And so the goal of this is not to be punitive. So the easiest and from a regulatory perspective, the least cost impacts to the city itself is to provide additional units in exchange for the development of those inclusionary zoning units, those price-controlled units. And so you can see here, outside the downtown, the recommendation is a 1-to-1. So for every inclusionary unit they have to provide, we provide them with a bonus unit of market rate. And then for downtown, it would be 2.5-to-1. And once again, that relates to the differential in cost, particularly how expensive it is to provide parking in the downtown. And so it requires a few additional units for every affordable that you create to be able to offset the impact of that deal. So, and then finally is consider payment in lieu of for certain units. And very simply, a payment in lieu strategy is saying rather than provide a unit, you can provide a financial contribution to the housing trust that equates to the value of the difference between that price-controlled unit and a market rate unit. And we did the math on what that is in today's marketplace for both rental and for owner. The graph you see, that very confusing color-coded graph over there on the right-hand side of the screen, shows you the difference between the value difference between market rate and different area median income thresholds. So the red, which is the 80% of AMI, is the difference is just about $36,000. For 70% of AMI, the gap jumps to $62,000. So you can see, first off, how that could be financially impactful. Every time we have to add one unit, that has another cost of 36 or 62, or even more if you go to a lower area median income threshold. But also it shows you the need for that bonus density or some sort of financial inducement to cover the impact of that deal. And so there's a little example here. Oh, and the other part is the math, the other part here is the math doesn't always equal to a whole unit. And so I put a little example here to talk about what's called a partial unit. So if it's a 75-unit development, which requires 10% of the units to be price controlled, that would be 7.5 units. Well, obviously you can't build a half of a unit. And so some communities require you to round up, which would mean you'd have to do 8, which would have a greater financial impact. We have worked with other communities and we find it much more fair and much more effective to say, well, rather than having to build that 8th unit, you have to contribute the value equivalent of that percentage. So you would have to pay 50% of what the value gap is between market rate and that affordable unit into our trust fund. And so that provides a better financial situation to help the developer out, which is more fair, but also it then provides funding into your housing trust fund, where that money can be used to either provide additional affordability elsewhere. You could buy down the AMI in certain projects if you wanted to provide them with the gap in the additional gap. It provides the city with options on how to not just address the inclusionary issue for that missing middle, but then provides a funding source for the housing trust fund. So the recommendation that we put in front of the city is between when this is enacted and June of next year, that the inclusionary policy that you're looking at here, and I'm going to walk you through all this, only focuses on projects of 50 units or larger because, as I mentioned, they have the greatest potential to absorb that cost. After June 30th, starting July 1st of next year, then the 10 to 49 units would kick in, which is why it's highlighted here. And so, once again, we're trying to be respectful and not create a shock, if you will, to your residential development market, so that investment can continue to happen, but also recognize and address the needs that were identified in the housing study and that the city has indicated it wants to address by providing a compulsory inclusionary policy that offers developers the chance, to be part of that, well, requires them to do it, but in a manner that's not going to financially impact them. So there's a lot on the slide. I'm going to walk you through it piece by piece. As you see right now, the unit count, that's very simple to understand, is there's different thresholds for each size of project, and as I mentioned, the smaller the project, the less requirement that is going to be placed on the investment. And up until June of 2022, anything under 50 doesn't do anything, and then after June of 2022, it goes down to 10 units. Anything less than 10 units is exempt from the inclusionary zoning policy. You can see here the next is location. For ownership, because ownership is a different animal, it doesn't really need to be separated out. However, for the rental side, you do have the downtown, which has a separate set of requirements than elsewhere in the city. And I already talked to you about the reasons for that. Isn't inclusionary zoning required? Once again, where it's grayed out here, it's no. And where it says yes, it tells you what the rules requirements are. And I didn't put this on here, but there are differences over the first 6 months of 2022 as opposed to moving on beyond that. Then the total percentage required, and we talked about this. The focus I want to put here for you is outside of the downtown, and for ownership everywhere, it's 10 9 to 40, 10%, 15 and 20%. For downtown, it's half. For all the reasons that we just talked about, which is cost of development in downtown is more expensive, and downtown already does have some concentration of affordability, and so we're trying not to concentrate there. And so this, when you also look at the bonus density, helps meet that revenue neutral strategy that we are trying to help the city put in place for development. The next is what's called the target area median incomes. And you can see here that what's called Tier 1, which is the first part, is always 80% of AMI. We did create a second tier for ownership as those larger projects, because 80% for ownership is much more financially challenging. And so our recommendation, city, as well, for those bigger projects, let's do a mixture of 80%, where it's always going to be 10% of the units are 80%, but those additional 5 and that additional 10% for those larger projects should target a little bit higher income. It mitigates some of the financial impact on the project, and when you look at our bonus density recommendations, you'll see we're able to cover that additional impact through a little bit higher bonus density. The payment for partial units, we're recommending yes for all of that. I already talked about the math of how all that works, and so we calculated the value differential between market and 80% for the city, at least for right now. That would need to be updated on a fairly regular basis. That was a question that the alderman had. Our recommendation is do it every year. However, you could probably get away with doing it every 2 years, but I wouldn't recommend going beyond that. But whatever that value differential that is calculated between market rate and 80% becomes that ratio of what you would have to provide. So in this example you see here on the screen, a 75 unit ownership deal requires 11.25 units. That 0.25 is partial. The value differential for an ownership unit between 80% market is about $100,000. So when you apply the 0.25, they would have to provide a cash contribution to the city housing trust fund for $25,000. That's a whole lot less financially impactful than requiring them to go up to 12 units, which would have the full $100,000 effect on the project. Next category is payment in lieu for all units. So this is where you say, well, rather than you building the units on site, we're going to allow you to put the money into the housing trust fund. And our recommendation is that should only be allowed in the downtown. Ownership projects and rental projects outside of downtown, you should have to put the units what's called on site. But for downtown, there is an option that you pay into the housing trust fund rather than put the units into the project. And once again, this is for the reason that we talked about. Downtown already has a concentration of affordability, and so this is an opportunity where the city can truly create a diversity of housing choice throughout Nashua rather than all focused or predominantly focused in one location. The payment value, once again, going back to what I talked about, this was from our calculations, and we learned the value gap differential between, and that's just a fancy way of saying how much is a house worth at market rate versus how much is that house worth at 80% of AMI, and how much is a rental unit worth if they're charging market rate compared to if they're only charging a rent that is affordable to someone earning 80% of AMI. And these are the numbers. And so when you're calculating partial unit payments, or if it's downtown and they choose to do the payment option, these are the numbers as of 2021. And once again, very, very important that those numbers be updated as market changes. The final component is the bonus density ratio. And as you can see here, the bonus density ratio varies. For ownership, under 50 where it's 10% affordability, it's a 1-to-1. So in a 100-unit project, or excuse me, in a 40-unit project, they have to provide 4 units at 80% of AMI. So then you get 4 market rate bonus units, so they can build a total of 44. On a larger project where it goes to 15 to 20%, the ratio bumps up to 2-to-1. And once again, that's because the value difference between market rate and the price controlled is substantially greater, and so as a result, it requires additional bonus to remain revenue neutral. And then for rental, it's 1-to-1 outside of downtown and 2.5-to-1 inside of downtown for all the same reasons that we just talked about. And this is just another math example of what I just walked through in terms of how you calculate how many units that you get. In this particular example, you have to deliver 7 deed-restricted units. This is an ownership project, so then you get 14 market rate. So even though you're going for a 50-unit development, you would actually be allowed to build 64 because we're requiring you to build 14 at deed restricted price point. So this is an example that we came just so you can understand and kind of tie it all together. It's a multifamily rental development. It's seeking 60 units outside of the downtown. They're using standard construction methodology, so there's nothing extraordinary happening here that will require some modification. Therefore, 9 of the units, or 15% of the total, would be required to be deed restricted for households earning 80% of AMI. And so we had considered a special exception. My apologies that this remains in here, but this is an option that is out there, and you could read in our report to provide an exception that the city could consider. We're not recommending that, but you could see what would happen with the 9 being required to do affordable. You would get 9 bonus market units, so you'd actually be able to build 69 units instead of just 60. And our math, and the reason for all that is our math shows that when you provide those additional units, those market rate units as bonus, it then mitigates the impact of the loss of value and the loss of revenue that those affordable units, those deed restricted units create. And just kind of wrap it up to show you what we're talking about here in the differences between 80% of AMI of rental and 80% of AMI in ownership, you can see the impact. So right now, in today's market, your market rate rentals are about 95%. They're priced towards a household about 95% of AMI. So you see the value differential for an 80% and 60% households. As I mentioned earlier, ownership's about 140%, which shows you the value gap difference between 100% of AMI and 80% of AMI. And this is the reason why that bonus density becomes so important, because without it, you would create some substantial financial impacts on those deals. And so that's why the bonus density recommendations are in there. And so, and we talk about here rates going up faster than the cost of living. This is why you would need to continue to review this and determine what are these different differential values so that you can adjust your policy so you maintain a revenue neutral position. So I probably talked longer than I was supposed to, and I apologize about that, but I felt it important that you fully understand the recommendation that we're putting in front of the city for its consideration.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think we got a pretty good understanding of it at this point. Anybody from the board have any questions? Mr. Barley?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple questions. I know you had talked about the need to update the sort of value differential for calculating the payment in lieu. I'm wondering, is it also the expectation that the target AMI is adjusted periodically, or is that sort of viewed as a more sort of standard value, the 80-100% for the ownership and 80% for the rental? Or do you also look at the market there and say, we make adjustments to that over time based on how the market changes?
Kyle, if you want to jump in, you're welcome to, but I'll respond first. I would say that we certainly would review those thresholds at some point in the future. Certainly the community's housing needs could change. I would say that we would not do that without further study. It would require additional feasibility analysis at that point in time based on the market conditions to make a change of that nature, in my opinion. Even these thresholds were very deliberate in the context of the housing study and after that feasibility analysis. So
the answer is yes,
but further study would be required.
But in terms of the payment in lieu differential calculation, that the thought is that would not be a feasibility study. That would be something you'd be more, that would be adjusted sort of on the fly, so to speak.
I would call it feasibility study light.
Okay.
We would still need to do some level of analysis, I think, in order to avoid arbitrarily adjusting those numbers. But I would argue that adjusting those payments would be less impactful and less of a lift than adjusting the thresholds, which are really substantial policy-based thresholds.
Right.
Kyle, I don't know if you want to add anything to that answer, but.
I think you know that, Matt. I think you should always be looking to say, well, it has HUD policy changes or has our market changed where there's a growing or new need that is emerging. So you should always be reviewing that. Matt is correct. That's this more substantial analysis than just trying to do the math calculation. But if in the future change the AMI target, you absolutely would need to do the analysis because those numbers would need to be substantially different to make it work.
Yeah, got it. And then just another technical question on the bonus density. So in the downtown, for the rental, there is the option for payment in lieu of all units. So if a developer in that instance chooses to exercise the right for payment in lieu for all units, is the intent that they still get the bonus density as well, or is it an either or?
No, because whether they pay the money into the housing trust fund or they provide the deed restricted unit on site, it still has the same financial impact to the project. And so the bonus density would be needed to help cover that $37,000 per unit payment that they're making to the city. So if they're having to develop 10 units and so they're writing a check for $370,000, without the bonus units, it would just create a negative $370,000 impact to the project.
Got it. Thank you.
Other questions by the board? Ms. Harper?
I just had a few questions about, how I guess the program works. So with the rental units, the tenant would need to obviously qualify through income to live in an affordable unit, but are they then recertified every year to maintain, or is it just when they first occupy it?
It's a great question. It's a one-time certification, so what we're really getting at there is a tenant going to be evicted if they no longer meet the threshold that's within the ordinance? The answer is no. It's upon new conveyance or lease of that particular unit to a new renter.
Just curious, because I know in some tax credit programs, then the unit will just become market rate, and then, the owner has to provide another affordable unit.
The one caveat I'd add is if you have a 10-unit building that's required to provide one unit, the unit could be flexed between multiple units as long as the character is generally the same. The deed restriction and lien that we're proposing on a rental or multifamily building applies to the building generally. It would not apply to one unit, so that could be flexed between multiple units. Because again, the idea is that they all remain in character the same.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. And then I guess also, so as far as the ownership goes, it's the same thing. It's just upon purchasing the property that the income has to be a requirement.
The trick with ownership, obviously, is that 30 years might pass between the initial conveyance of the property. That purchase price would have to be revisited at that new date. The market would have to be analyzed, and the sale would still have to meet that requirement within the ordinance at that time. The restriction on the property would not expire upon the next conveyance.
And is there any restriction on that owner from renting the property to somebody else?
We had some discussions.
We
had some discussions
about that. And actually, I don't remember exactly where we landed. Kyle, do you remember where we landed on that particular question?
I believe the recommendation was to require owner occupancy for that to qualify. I don't believe the intent is to allow someone to buy a deed restricted unit and then turn it into a rental unit and charge market rate prices. I think it requires owner occupancy.
Yeah.
What would prevent somebody from doing that, though?
The theoretical answer is enforcement, right? And so, we would be doing enforcement through the urban programs department most likely, and so we have to be made aware of something like that, and we would
then step in
and call that deed restriction. The city would have to take enforcement action.
Okay. Just because obviously if we're asking someone to provide this housing, we want to be providing that housing.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had some pretty detailed discussions about enforcement, and to be very candid about it, if ultimately we create 100 units of housing and we have 2 enforcement issues throughout that period of time, we've been very effective in the implementation of this ordinance. So we do anticipate issues, and we're not sure exactly how we're going to perform enforcement when they do arise, but it's definitely a complex ordinance to implement because of its relationship to income particularly.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Mr. Meehan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the proposed ordinance C1, it talks about 99 years. Is that part of that previous question, that there's a term limit on this, that after 99 years it goes into whatever the market rate is?
Sure, it's a great question. So in New Hampshire, you cannot possibly put a perpetuity control on the property, and so we had initially written this as an in perpetuity clause. However,
99 years is the maximum deed control that we can have.
Okay.
And that's why it's written in that regard. Next question, what happens after 99 years? We're not so certain about that. We'll have to revisit that. But
I guess I could give a better answer, but that's the reality. We
would like to put some other mechanism into place, but we'll leave that for that generation to deal with. I think.
Yeah.
And then if I could follow up, this begs the projection, right, in light of population, demographic projections as we look forward, and as the consultant mentioned, the anticipated increases. Is there any sense of the impact this would have? And I guess the other question I would have in that is, how is it assessed? How do you guys monitor, and are you going to come back in 5 years and say, this was a great success, X number of units were built, this percentage is affordable, we have this many dollars in our trust fund? How do you assess it all?
Yeah, so we don't have the metrics yet, to be quite honest about it, but we anticipate
that, and let me back up actually. So this is really step one in this process, the creation of the ordinance. The next step, and the reason that we gave this detailed presentation to the planning board, is that ultimately rules and policies need to be put into place that the planning board will actually be drafting, and we'll work with you to do that. Right. You will ultimately adopt the policies that enforce this ordinance when it comes to that point in time. As part of those policies, I anticipate that we will have metrics that we're reporting on regularly. Certainly, any good inclusionary zoning ordinance is in fact coupled with a series of benchmarks that allows us to track over time how we've done. Urban Programs currently does that as part of their HUD obligations, obviously, and their CDBG obligations. They will be the ones responsible for actually implementing and controlling this. And so we'd work with them to set up those metrics that you're talking about, because certainly as we look forward to 2 years or 5 years from now, we need the ability to actually look back and say how we've done. And we don't have those yet, but we know that we will need to establish them.
Sure.
Thanks, Matt, for being so gracious here. My last question was just the overlay of this with the master plan, right? I think that's really interesting, how the master plan is hoping to do X, Y, and Z, especially in redeveloping. That's one of the things we talked about when you presented that. Can you just comment on that, the idea of redevelopment and the key areas in Nashua and implementing the zoning, how it works together?
Great question. I would start by saying that
the housing section of the master plan talks about diversity of housing types and prices, so it fits well with that. Relative to the specific redevelopment areas, I would say that the differentiation between the downtown and the peripheral areas complements a lot of the redevelopment that we've talked about. A lot of the residential density
increases that we've contemplated in the master plan
line up with the density bonuses that we're proposing as part of this ordinance here. Relative to other areas where other developments are contemplated, and I
note that the first tests of this ordinance are likely to be
single-family developments in peripheral areas of the community, oddly enough, which maybe I did not anticipate when we were drafting it. But when those do come in, they cut a bit against, I think, what we see in the master plan. But I believe that the need for affordable housing is of the highest priority, and therefore the strict alignment between what this does and the redevelopment areas in the master plan is perhaps a lesser priority than affordable housing need.
It is very exciting to me to think that, because the master plan was just that beautiful comprehensive document, that this kind of adds some teeth and adds some concreteness to it. That's exciting.
Mr. Vernon?
Yeah, just to follow up on Ms. Harper's questions about the sort of post-purchase, so for the ownership units and the deed restriction. So is the idea the deed restriction would indicate, for example, if the unit was originally sold at the 80% target AMI, that the resale price, let's say it's 25 years down the road, would then have to be at 80% of AMI. That's the basic conceptual framework.
Correct. And it would also make clear that the original purchase was made within the context of this ordinance and that the purchase was subject to this ordinance.
And it would be based on the criteria in place at the time of the purchase. So if those targets, for example, were adjusted over time.
Yes, that's a great question. And so if the thresholds within the ordinance are adjusted at a later time, and perhaps, Kyle, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, it would be essentially grandfathered in the sense that it would be subject to the provisions under which it was initially approved. It would not be subject to the new provisions if they are adjusted. Does that answer your question, Mr. Varley?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
it does. And just, I'm sorry, last question. I'm assuming that there would be some formal disclosure of the deed restrictions, beyond sort of the normal real estate disclosures that would, that would notify the purchaser that you understand that you are purchasing it at this affordable price and that you are bound for the duration by those same terms.
It's an interesting question, and I'm not sure I know the answer. So I'm not sure we would go above and beyond the traditional disclosure process. Our fear, whether it be a housing issue or some other easement-based restriction or a drainage matter, we always are afraid that those are going to be written out of deeds as they are conveyed from property to property and forgotten. This would not function in that way. I'm confident it would be transferred from deed to deed, but I don't know if we would go above and beyond when it came to disclosure or how exactly we would go about doing that.
Okay.
Mr. Hirsch?
Thank you. So effectively, there's a cap on the resales of these units. Is that what would happen?
That's correct.
Your cap would be, so even if the market is way beyond that, you would still be capped at a certain number of dollars?
You would be capped at a certain number of dollars, but those dollars would theoretically keep pace with the change in the market. So it would still be, the proportion would likely remain the same, but the dollar amount would not be fixed at what it was initially sold for or purchased for.
The percentage.
Right. The percentage of the marketing.
Yes. Yes. 80% AMI.
Correct. Yep.
Thank you.
That moves. Okay. Other questions? Okay. Pretty good presentation. I feel a pretty good understanding of what's going on. Does anybody feel like they have enough information to make a motion? In this case, we'd make motions for a positive referral or a negative or something would change. Mr. Meehan?
Yeah, I move that we provide a positive referral of the ordinance 021073, amending the inclusionary zoning supplemental use regulations.
Okay. And as written?
As written.
Okay. So we have that motion for a positive referral as written to that referral being to the Board of Aldermen. From the Planning Board, do we have a second on it? Second by Mr. Varley. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? That motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, thanks for the presentation. The only thing left we have is a nomination committee for officers. Usually what we do is one person takes the lead of sending an email around to the members of the board and, asking who wants to be considered for what positions. Again, there's the three, the chair, vice chair, secretary positions, and collects nominations, basically, and then we come up with a slate and then presents it at the January meeting. It says, following people are nominated, this was the, whatever majority of the nominations, and makes a recommendation for us to all talk about and consider. So usually we talk about whether the folks that are in the role are still interested, and so that people know. I'm saying I'm still interested in the position I'm in. I don't know, Mr. Barley, if you are as well.
I'm still willing.
Ms. Harper?
And able to.
I'm still interested.
Okay, so does anybody want to take the lead on sending the email around?
Just a point of,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I think I've done it the last 2 years. I know
Yeah.
one year Ed was too busy, and we knew last year his retirement was imminent.
Yeah.
I'm going to maybe pass the buck or
I
at
can
least
do
bring it
it.
up for discussion. I
Sure.
think it was traditionally the secretary's
traditionally, yeah.
responsibility.
Yeah, I can
Are you sure? 'Cause
I think I can.
Okay, I didn't want to take away from your formal duties.
No,
if,
no,
okay.
not at all.
All right.
So, I don't know if we need a motion. I don't think that's a motionable thing at this point. But the motion would come later with the nomination. All right, any other discussion items for anybody? Okay, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Anyone?
Motion to adjourn.
Mr. Hirsch, motion to adjourn. We don't need a second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. And that motion passes. We're adjourned at 9:14. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, posterity? Okay. I'll toss it back, sorry. I didn't mean to.
All right. These, as we said before, I think some of us are heading over to mark this.
Thanks, Dan, appreciate it.
Festivus.
Anytime that I have two or more minutes.
Yeah.